I would kick it off by revisiting some of the comments made in October about should we have been worried about what the bond market was telling us. Interest rates were falling, they were low, the equity market didn't seem to be paying too much attention to us. And I guess, Mark, maybe I'll start with you and ask you what they're telling us now. Should we be worried? And how does that reconcile with fundamentals and sentiment?
The question I was asked in October was, what's smarter, the bond market or the equity market? I'm an equity guy by background, so it's tempting to say the equities, but I did study this many years ago, and the bond market, the corporate bond market over 200-year history, often smells the problems a bit earlier. They're a bit more sensitive to credit, a bit more sensitive to the environment. And what the market was telling us back in October, and to some extent still is that we live in a deflationary environment. That's obvious. Everyone's now talking about it. But the market, deflation environment, you have to think through. I was thinking about the people in this room. I had to present the other day in Melbourne, and half the room were people in their 70s or 80s, maybe. They're quite old. The other were professional people in our industry. And to get them on side, I said to the half in the room, who was here during the inflationary period? And half of them got excited because they were remembering the inflationary period. And who was here post the early 1980s? And what we've seen since the early 1980s is 30 years of declining interest rates. And that's an unusually long trend in anything. And it's been a very powerful force for everything that we do. But the other thing that we saw over that 30-year period is that usually recessions come because of inflation. Usually recessions come and you get a bit of inflation, the central banks raise rates, you get a correction, and the world acts in an inflationary way. What we're dealing with now is a deflationary world, which is completely different. What happens is with deflation and excess supply, the supply eats at you like a cancer. It just sort of appears and corrodes the industry. And what the bond market felt last year was that there's clearly an excess supply. So as an investor, in any asset you look at, think about supply as your number one issue because that's what will corrode the market. And we're seeing that potentially in some areas of real estate here in Australia, but we're clearly seeing it in a whole bunch of other areas. So the answer is that the bonds saw it early. I think there's still excess supply. I think there is workouts on the way, but it's not time yet in many industries. But the other question that the markets are obviously fearful of is that supposing this gets out of hand, how many tools are there left in the toolbox? The Economist has got that as the cover this week, as you know. We should never talk about a cover, but there's no question that we're now fearful about that changed relationship. So that was the issue that the bond market was flagging to us. What I think a lot of people aren't thinking through is that excess supply recessions are completely different. And they're completely different because you don't get an apparent crisis. It just eats at you. And the problem with that is that politicians don't respond. And this is why here in Australia, we've probably got excess supply going on a whole bunch of places, but there's no political will because there's no apparent crisis. And that is completely different to what we've been used to for the last 30 years. And the bond market smelt that and has been trying to come to grips with that as a number of asset classes. So long answer to the question, but that's what's